Hey guys, welcome back to Maxie's Kitchen, or welcome to Maxie's Kitchen if this is your first time here. I'm so glad to have you over. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to make party jollof rice. Now, a lot of people have asked me for a jollof recipe and I'm finally glad to give you my very first jollof recipe. Now, in this recipe I wouldn't be using any fresh tomatoes. I would only use tomato paste, and I really want to teach you how to make it with just tomato paste. So stay tuned, don't go anywhere. So here's a list of all the ingredients we'll be using. Every one with the asterisks isn't very necessary or is optional. So the first page has all the ingredients and the second page has all the spices that I used. Now I used chopped mutton and salted beef. Now I always try as much as possible to debone my meat before I use it for my jollof, and that's what I did. So I had cleaned my meat. So over here in this bowl I have my sliced onions, my chopped onion, and my garlic, cloves, scotch bonnet peppers, herbs, and ginger. I'm going to first of all blend the chopped onions with the chopped garlic and then the chopped ginger. Okay, those are the three that I'm going to blend. I'm going to add some cloves. This gives it a nice flavor, but if you do not have cloves, you can just omit it. So to the rest of the blended natural spices in the blender, add the scotch bonnet to them and blend them again, and then we'll use that for the jollof rice. Now the all-purpose seasoning that I always use is Badia Complete Seasoning. It's so good, and I've left a link to it in my Amazon storefront. So if you're in the UK or in the US and you want to buy some, just check Amazon. But if you're in Ghana, you should be able to find it easily. Also, the raw shrimp powder is just a replacement for stock cubes like Knorr cubes or Maggi cubes. So if you have those, you can use that instead of the raw shrimp powder. So you want to mix everything well together, and you want to cover it and cook it on medium to high heat. Now you don't want to add any water at this stage. This is to make sure that the spices really get into the meat before you actually add the water to help it cook through. So I took my meat out of the pot, saved the meat stock, and I also wiped the pot so I didn't have to wash it. I just wiped it with kitchen tissue and then put a bit of oil in the pot. Now I'm going to shallow fry my meat. Now a lot of people like to deep fry their meat until it's well fried, but I don't like to do that. I just shallow fry for a few minutes and then take it out. Please feel free to do whatever that you want to do, but this is how I do mine. So once that's done, I'm going to take the meat out and then we're going to start making our jollof stew with this oil. Now bear in mind that I love cooking with herbs. Now if you don't have fresh herbs, don't worry, you don't have to use it. It's not obligatory to use it for this recipe, but if you do have some herbs, please try and incorporate some into your dish. Now this is like the star ingredient of this recipe, the tomato paste. This is the kind of tomato paste that I use, but there are so many different brands out there. You want to use one that's really concentrated in color, okay? So I used a full tube, and after I used the full tube, I also used half of another tube. So I used a full tube and a half. Okay, now I've put the measurements at the start of this video, so if you're not even using the tube one, you can just measure it out. Now what you want to do is to fry the tomato paste very well before you move on to the next stage. This is so important because it's so concentrated and you want to fry it well, or else you get that sweet taste and acidic taste that the tomato paste has, okay? So even if it takes about 10 minutes to fry, please make sure that you are frying it very well. And if there's not enough oil, you have to add a bit of oil to make sure that it's actually frying. I also added some curry powder to cut down on the acidity. This is the first time I did that. I don't usually do that. I only make sure that I'm actually frying for a very, very long time. But the curry powder helps, so you can try that method. So now that my tomato paste is well fried, I fried it for about 8 to 10 minutes. You guys can tell that it's very well fried. I added in the rest of my blended mixture that I blended with some scotch bonnet peppers as well. So I added that in, rinsed the blender cup and the head of the blender cup with some water, and added all of that into the pot. So I'm just giving that a good mix, and I'm going to cover this and let this cook on medium heat for some time. So before you move to the next stage, you want to be able to see some oil on top of your stew. So at this point, I'm going to add the stock and a cup of water. Now, some people like to add the stock once, like after they add the rice to the stew, but I like to do it at this point because I like my stock to actually cook with the stew, okay? So I've just added in the water. I'm just mixing that in just to help the tomatoes also cook properly. And then I'm going to add in the stock that we got from steaming our meat. So I've given it a good mix, and now I'm going to put the lid on the pot, but I'm just going to leave a little space, and I'm just going to cook it for some time. So I cooked it, and I've seen that the oil is beginning to show at the top of the stew, but it's not quite done yet. Now I haven't spiced my stew yet or anything because I put the stock in it, and remember that we used a lot of spices to steam the meat, so they are all still in the stock. So I tasted it before I added in some extra spices. So I basically just used most of the spices that I used to steam my meat, and I just added in some jollof seasoning by Badi as well, which I completely love. If you can get your hands on that, you can use that as well. And I also added in some mixed herbs. I think I used that for the meat as well, but yeah, just play around with the spices. The only spice that I used to steam my meat that I didn't use at this point is salt, so I wouldn't add salt until I add my rice, okay? So now you guys can see that the stew has thickened very well, and the oil is at the very surface of the stew. And at this point you want to add your meat in, okay, because the stew is almost done, to be honest. So we're just going to mix the meat in and just let it simmer for some time. At this point you can decide to take some of the stew out before you add in the meat, but I just always add the meat before I take some out. So we're just going to let this simmer and then we'll come back. So I'm just setting some of the stew aside because I wouldn't be using everything for the jollof rice. Now I know that there's a lot of oil in my stew. Now the reason why you guys see a lot of oil is because the oil helps the stew to fry very well before you add your rice. Once it's done its part, you can just scoop the extra left, okay? Now to the rice. I only use jasmine rice and jasmine rice only for my jollof, and I think it's the best rice for jollof actually. I know a lot of people use basmati, others use long grain, but this is the best, okay? Now I don't wash my rice. A lot of people say that when you wash your rice, you're trying to get the starch out and everything, but I don't do that. I only wash the rice when you know that maybe there are some insects in the rice that you need to get out. That's the only time I'll wash my rice, because like I said, I'm not trying to add in extra water at this point. Okay, so what I've just done is that I've mixed the rice with the stew very well. Okay, now bear in mind that the heat is on, everything's on low heat right now, like the pot is on low heat. I'm going to add my salt and mix that in. This is when the salt comes in, so you're just going to mix that in with the rice very well. You want to make sure that every grain is well coated with the stew. Okay, now you don't want to add too much rice to the point where it looks dry. Okay, this is the kind of thing that you want to get. Now whenever I'm making jollof, I never ever skip this step. I always cover the pot once I've mixed everything together, and then I put it on low heat just so that everything can get mixed well together. Now what this does is that it helps the stew stick to the rice, okay, before you adding any liquid, okay, to cook the rice. But I do this for about 3 to 5 minutes on low heat, and then once I start to see the steam, I add in water. Okay, so it would be best to add in hot water, just so that the cold water, if you're going to add cold water, it's just going to slow the cooking process down, because it will now have to heat up before it does what it's supposed to do. So I add in the hot water, mix it, and then yeah, I just leave it on low heat. But as I'm adding the hot water, I'm also tasting to make sure that there's enough salt. If I think that there's not enough salt, I add some. So make sure you taste as you go at this point for the salt, okay, because once the jollof is cooked, that's it, you can't really go back. Now once you mix everything in, you want to make sure that there's like a layer of water at the top at least. I added in some green peppers, and then I'm going to put a parchment paper on top or aluminium foil, and then cover with the lid, and we're going to cook on low heat. After about 15 minutes on low heat, I just opened the pot, the lid. I just took the lid off and I checked the rice. So I just turned it a bit, just so that it could cook evenly. Now please do not get tempted to add any water to your jollof rice at this point, because trust me, all you need to do is to just cover it with a parchment paper or aluminium foil, and the steam is going to soften the rice. Now this is my very first time using a cast iron pot to make jollof rice. I haven't ever done this before, and I just realized that at the end I just felt like I could have left it a bit longer, just so that all of the grains would become soft. I think you guys would be able to tell that there were a few grains that didn't really soften up. Just a few extra minutes would have done the job, maybe like 5 minutes. But here is the result of what we did. And this jollof was really tasty, don't get me wrong, but I just wish that I added a bit less rice, just so that I could get it to be, juicy and rich. I like to enjoy my jollof that way, just so that it would be a bit stewy, okay? But this is it. This was so delicious. I served it up with some herb and papuchito chicken and some salad. Guys, let me tell you something about this chicken and this creamy coleslawy potato salad. Guys, these two are the best things ever to have with my jollof. So good. I honestly wanted to just like do a recipe video, but now actually I want you guys to get this video to 50 likes, okay, and then I'll post the recipe, okay? So yeah, this was so delicious, and trust me, like, you guys would definitely want the chicken recipe and that of the potato salad. So make sure you subscribe, make sure you send it to your friends, get this video to 50 likes, and I'll catch you in my next recipe video. Bye.